Most people believe they can recognize value instantly. If it looks strong, it must be useful. If it looks weak, it must be disposable. That belief feels logical, almost obvious, and yet it's one of the most dangerous lies we carry without noticing. Because the truth is uncomfortable. Some of the most important things in life arrive looking like problems, not opportunities. Here's the paradox nobody warns you about. What looks like a burden often isn't heavy because it's useless, but because it's forming something inside you. And what looks like power often collapses the moment it's challenged by patience, integrity, and time. That's not motivational talk, that's observation, hard-earned observation. If you've ever been offered something that felt like an insult disguised as a favor, if you've ever been told to be grateful for less than you deserved, if you've ever accepted scraps just to survive another day, then this story isn't entertainment for you. It's a mirror. We live in a world that confuses value with appearance and worth with productivity. People are measured by what they generate, not by who they are. And slowly, without realizing it, many start believing that if they're struggling, they must be failing. That if they're carrying something heavy, it must be a mistake. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the thing you wanted to get rid of is actually the thing teaching you endurance, clarity, and strength? This story isn't about cows, land, or rich men. Those are just symbols. It's about how the world treats what it considers expendable, and how quiet character responds when no one is clapping. It's about the invisible decisions that shape destiny long before success becomes visible. And it's about a truth that most people only understand too late. Dignity preserved in silence is never wasted. You'll see a man who has every reason to give up, and a man who has every advantage yet loses something far more valuable than money. You'll see how arrogance blinds, how patience compounds, and how justice doesn't always arrive wearing a badge or carrying a verdict. Sometimes it arrives disguised as consequence. If you're looking for quick motivation, this isn't it. But if you're looking for something deeper, something that might quietly change the way you see your struggles, your responsibilities, and even your self-worth, then stay with me. Because by the end of this story, one question will matter more than all the others. What do you do when life hands you something no one else wants? Before we go any further, let me ask you something simple. If stories like this challenge the way you think and help you see life with more clarity, subscribe to the channel. Like this video so it reaches more people who might need it, and share it with someone who's carrying something heavy and wondering if it's all for nothing. Now let's begin. At first glance, what Don Rodrigo does doesn't look cruel. In fact, if someone were to describe it quickly, it might even sound generous. He gifts Juan a cow. Not just any cow, of course, but the thinnest one in the corral. Bones visible, ribs sharp enough to count from a distance, eyes dull with exhaustion. Still, the word he uses is gift. And that's precisely where the humiliation hides, not in shouting, not in insults, but in language carefully dressed as kindness. Don Rodrigo delivers the cow with a half smile and a phrase that sounds almost charitable. For someone who has nothing, something is better than nothing. It lands softly, but it cuts deep. Because what he's really saying is, you don't get to choose. You should be grateful for scraps. And Juan understands that instantly. He feels it in his chest, the familiar tightening that comes when dignity is tested in silence. Here's the thing most people miss. Humiliation doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in opportunity, labeled as a favor, signed with a contract, and justified with logic. The world has mastered this trick. It calls exploitation a chance. It calls discard a blessing. It says, at least you got something, as if that should cancel the disrespect. Juan could have protested. He could have argued that the cow was useless, that it was more burden than help. But experience had taught him something bitter and valuable. Protesting people like Don Rodrigo rarely brings justice, it only brings consequences. And so Juan does what many honest people learn to do. He swallows the humiliation, not because he agrees with it, but because survival sometimes demands silence. This moment reflects something painfully familiar. Think about how often people accept unfair conditions because they're afraid of losing what little they have. The unpaid overtime called learning experience. The job with no growth labeled as a foot in the door. The relationship where crumbs of affection are framed as generosity. The world is very good at convincing people that scarcity means they should accept disrespect. And yet, there's a subtle but powerful truth here. Accepting something doesn't mean accepting the meaning attached to it. Juan takes the cow, but he doesn't take Don Rodrigo's narrative. He doesn't internalize the idea that he's worth less. That distinction matters a lot, because the real humiliation only wins when it rewrites how you see yourself. If you're watching this and thinking, "I've been there," you're not weak. You're human. But there's a quiet question forming beneath this scene, one that doesn't ask about the cow at all. It asks about character, about what someone does when the world hands them leftovers and expects gratitude. And more importantly, about what happens next, when no one is watching. Once the cow is tied near Juan's land, something interesting happens. The world, so loud a moment ago through Don Rodrigo's voice, suddenly goes quiet. No witnesses, no contracts being waved around, no eyes judging, just Juan, the animal, and a choice that won't make the news, won't impress anyone, and won't bring immediate reward. And that's precisely why this moment matters more than all the others. Juan has options, very real ones. He could abandon the cow and let nature finish what neglect started. No one would blame him. He could sell it quickly, even for a miserable price, and turn the problem into a little cash. He could simply do nothing, which is often the easiest and most socially accepted form of cruelty. After all, the cow was already half dead. It wasn't his fault. That's how people justify walking away from what's inconvenient. But Juan doesn't rush. He stands there longer than necessary, studying the animal, noticing details most people ignore, the shallow breathing, the way it struggles to stay upright. And somewhere between logic and instinct, a sentence forms in his mind. Not dramatic, not heroic, just painfully simple. No one deserves to end like this. He doesn't say it out loud. He doesn't need to. The decision is already being made inside him. This is where character reveals itself, not in grand gestures, but in small, private decisions that cost something and promise nothing in return. Juan chooses to care, not because it's smart, but because it's right, and there's a difference. Smart decisions calculate outcomes. Right decisions answer to something deeper, a personal code, a quiet line you refuse to cross, even when crossing it would make life easier. Many people like to believe they're good until goodness becomes inconvenient, until it demands time, energy, money, or patience. Juan knows this cost intuitively. Caring for the cow means less rest, less food for himself, fewer resources in a life that already feels tight. Yet he also knows something else, something most people only learn after regret has already settled in. Once you harden your heart to survive, it becomes very difficult to soften it again. There's a practical lesson hiding here. When faced with a moral choice, one useful question isn't, "What do I gain?" but, "Who do I become if I choose this?" If you apply that lens to real life, it changes things. It changes how you treat the coworker everyone ignores, how you respond to the elderly neighbor who moves slowly and talks too long, how you deal with people who can't repay your kindness. Juan's choice doesn't fix his life, not yet. It doesn't suddenly make things fair, but it does something quieter and far more dangerous to the logic of the world. It preserves his humanity, and once that door is opened, Once compassion is chosen without witnesses, something subtle starts to grow. Not outside, inside, and that growth, though invisible now, is about to demand sacrifice and patience in ways Juan doesn't fully understand yet. From the outside, nothing about Juan's routine looks heroic. There's no music swelling in the background, no one clapping, no sudden sign that he made the right choice. In fact, if someone were watching from a distance, they might think he'd made a foolish one. Every morning now starts earlier, not because life got better, but because responsibility quietly expanded. Hope, when it's real, usually shows up disguised as work. Water becomes the first problem. There isn't much to spare, and what exists has to be carried by hand, bucket after bucket, from a place that's already drying up. Juan measures every drop with care, not because he's calculating profit, but because scarcity teaches respect. He learns how much the cow needs and how much he can still afford to keep for himself. That kind of math doesn't show up in books. It shows up in tired shoulders and sore hands. Food is the next challenge. There's no money for proper feed, so Juan improvises. He remembers what his father once did during a drought years ago. Wild herbs, scraps, anything with nutrients. Not everything works. Some days feel pointless, others feel like progress. And that's the reality of caring for something fragile. You don't get guarantees, only responsibility. Still, Juan keeps going. What costs the most, though, isn't water or food, it's time. Time stolen from rest, from sleep, from the small moments that make poverty tolerable, like sitting quietly at the end of the day doing nothing at all. Juan sacrifices those moments without announcing it to anyone. No one sees the nights when exhaustion presses heavier than hunger. No one praises consistency, and that's exactly why this kind of goodness is rare. There's a powerful truth hidden here. Applause changes behavior. Silence reveals character. Many people are generous when generosity is visible, rewarded, or remembered. But goodness practiced in secret reshapes the person who practices it. Juan isn't becoming rich yet. He isn't becoming admired. He's becoming steady. And steadiness, though boring on the surface, is one of the most underestimated forces in life. If you've ever done the right thing and felt foolish for it, you're closer to this story than you think. Caring for a family member when no one thanks you, showing up to a job that drains you while you plan something better quietly, helping someone who may never even acknowledge it. These moments feel invisible, but they're not wasted. They're doing work beneath the surface. Juan doesn't know it yet, but something is shifting, not loudly, not dramatically. The cow begins to respond in small ways, standing a little longer, breathing a little easier. Nothing that would impress Don Rodrigo, nothing that would change a contract. But hope rarely announces itself, it whispers. And when it does, it asks a dangerous question. What if this isn't pointless? That question hangs in the air, unanswered. And as Juan continues caring without applause, without certainty, without guarantees, the story quietly prepares its next move. One that will challenge not only his patience, but his understanding of what he's been carrying all along. For a long time, Juan believes he's simply slowing down the inevitable. The cow survives. Yes, but survival alone doesn't feel like victory. It feels like delay. And sometimes delay can be heavier than loss, because it stretches uncertainty day after day. Juan keeps working without expecting anything more than a quiet conscience. Then, almost accidentally, the story shifts. It begins with something subtle. The cow eats differently. Her posture changes. She stands with a firmness that wasn't there before. Juan notices because he has learned how to look, not the way owners look at assets, but the way caretakers look at life. He calls an old neighbor, someone who understands animals better than paperwork, better than contracts. The man watches in silence, squints, and then says something that lands heavier than any insult Juan has ever swallowed. "This cow isn't dying," he says. "She's pregnant." The words hang in the air. Pregnant, not sick beyond repair, not a lost cause, a life carrying life. In a single moment, the meaning of everything Juan has been carrying begins to rearrange itself. What he thought was weakness reveals itself as exhaustion. What looked like decay reveals itself as transition, and the weight he thought was pointless suddenly feels purposeful. This is the kind of reversal that doesn't just change circumstances, it changes perspective. One realizes that the cow was never a symbol of misfortune. She was a test disguised as burden, a responsibility that required patience before it offered understanding. And that's how many turning points in life arrive, quietly, without permission, long after most people would have walked away. Soon after, there's more. The cow gives milk, not a lot at first, but enough. Enough to feed Juan better, enough to share, enough to feel possibility creep back into a life that had grown used to managing disappointment. What once drained him now begins to sustain him. The burden starts giving back. There's a lesson here most people miss because they're too busy escaping discomfort. Some things don't reveal their value until you carry them long enough. Skills, relationships, callings, even personal growth. Many people abandon what feels heavy before understanding what it's forming in them. Juan stayed, and staying changed everything. Think about how often people mistake potential for punishment. A demanding season gets labeled as bad luck. A difficult responsibility gets called a mistake. But sometimes, what feels like loss is simply life reorganizing itself in a way that takes time to understand. Milk doesn't come from neglect. Life doesn't come from avoidance. Juan doesn't celebrate yet. He doesn't run to anyone. He just stands there longer than necessary, hand resting on the cow's side, feeling movement where he once felt emptiness. The transformation isn't loud. It doesn't feel finished. In fact, it creates a new tension because now the cow isn't just his burden anymore. She's valuable, and value, especially unexpected value, has a way of attracting attention from the very person who once discarded her. It doesn't take long for Don Rodrigo to hear the whispers, milk being sold, a cow that was supposedly finished, standing strong again. Life has a way of exposing what arrogance prefers to forget. And when Don Rodrigo realizes that the animal he discarded now has value, something old and predictable awakens inside him. Entitlement dressed up as legality. He doesn't come angry at first. He comes prepared. Papers, witnesses. The tone of someone who believes the law is on his side, and therefore morality should be too. He reminds Juan, calmly and firmly, that the cow was never really a gift. It was part of a settlement, a transaction. And transactions, in his world, can always be reversed when the balance shifts. This is where the conflict sharpens, because Don Rodrigo isn't entirely wrong, at least not on paper. The contract exists. The power imbalance is obvious. The system recognizes his authority, and that's what makes this moment so uncomfortable. Juan isn't facing a villain twirling a mustache. He's facing something far more dangerous, a man who can justify injustice without raising his voice. Juan listens. He always does. But something inside him has changed since the cow stopped being just a burden. Caring has a way of clarifying values. He realizes that giving the cow back wouldn't just mean losing milk or future calves. It would mean agreeing with the idea that effort, compassion, and patience count for nothing if power decides otherwise. And that's a price Juan isn't willing to pay. There's a sentence that surfaces in his mind, simple and unmovable. Some things are not for sale. Dignity is one of them. Care is another. You can't reclaim what you abandoned once someone else has given it life. Not ethically, not honestly. And yet, Don Rodrigo doesn't see it that way. To him, value determines ownership. To Juan, responsibility does. This tension exists everywhere, not just on farmland. It shows up when corporations exploit loopholes while calling it strategy, when people take credit for work they once ignored, when someone returns only after success is visible, claiming rights they never honored during struggle. Legality can explain a lot, but it can't justify everything. Juan's refusal isn't loud. He doesn't insult Don Rodrigo. He doesn't threaten. He simply stands his ground. And standing your ground quietly can be more unsettling than shouting, because it removes the illusion that authority alone decides what's right. Don Rodrigo senses it immediately. The balance he thought was fixed suddenly feels unstable. Because when someone poor refuses to surrender their dignity, the system doesn't know how to respond. It only knows how to escalate, and that escalation is coming. When quiet refusal fails, power rarely retreats. It reorganizes. Don Rodrigo doesn't argue philosophy or morality anymore. He shifts strategy. What couldn't be taken with words will be taken with pressure. And pressure, when applied by those who own land, influence, and connections, has a way of feeling inevitable. The first attempt is subtle, a visit that comes too early in the morning, men standing a little too close, a reminder, casually delivered, that problems can always get bigger. Juan feels it immediately, that cold, familiar weight in the stomach that comes when you realize you're no longer dealing with a disagreement, but a warning. This isn't about the cow anymore, it's about obedience. Then comes fear, real fear. The kind that keeps you awake at night, replaying conversations in your head. The kind that makes you calculate escape routes instead of plans. Juan knows how these stories usually end. The poor don't win arguments against the powerful. They survive them if they're lucky. And yet, even here, something inside him refuses to collapse. When the authorities appear, the imbalance becomes official. Uniforms, stamps, formal language. Don Rodrigo speaks confidently, like someone who's rehearsed this moment many times before. Juan notices how differently he's treated, spoken over, interrupted, reduced to a problem instead of a person. The system listens politely to power and impatiently to poverty. It always has. What's happening isn't illegal. That's the most unsettling part. It's procedural, proper, clean, and deeply unfair. This is how injustice survives without calling attention to itself. No one breaks the law. They simply bend it in the direction it's always leaned. Watching this unfold, Juan feels anger rise, not explosive, but heavy. The kind of anger that doesn't scream. It sinks. Contained anger. Powerless frustration. The temptation to give up just to make it stop. These emotions don't make you dramatic. They make you human. Many people recognize this moment in their own lives. The workplace complaint that goes nowhere. The dispute where money decides truth. The situation where being right doesn't matter as much as being connected. And yet, even as the system closes ranks around Don Rodrigo, something else is quietly unfolding beyond contracts and authority. Because systems can pressure behavior, but they can't control consequences. They can enforce compliance, but they can't rewrite reality forever. The same arrogance that believes it's untouchable often overlooks the simplest truth. Not every outcome is negotiable. Juan senses it without understanding it fully. The injustice peaks, stretches thin, almost daring the world to respond. And while Don Rodrigo feels protected, even invincible, the ground beneath his certainty is already shifting, silently, invisibly, preparing a response that no contract, no influence, and no intimidation can stop. Justice, when it comes quietly, rarely asks for permission. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain itself. It simply arrives, often long after arrogance has grown comfortable. While Don Rodrigo feels protected by papers, by people, by the familiar machinery of influence, something entirely different is unfolding far from meeting rooms and signatures. Something organic, unimpressed by authority. It begins as a rumor, then another. A sickness spreading through the herds. At first, Don Rodrigo dismisses it. Problems are for other people. That's what wealth teaches, distance from consequence. But denial only works until reality knocks harder. One animal falls ill, then another. Strong cattle, expensive cattle, the kind bred for prestige and profit. The irony is sharp enough to sting, even if no one says it out loud. Meanwhile, Juan watches from a distance, confused and cautious. His cow remains healthy, calm, unaffected. The same animal once ridiculed, once discarded as useless, now stands untouched while others weaken. The breed Don Rodrigo mocked, the lineage he considered inferior, carries something his prized cattle don't. Resistance, not strength in appearance, but resilience in essence. This is where the story turns deeply uncomfortable for anyone who believes power guarantees safety. The very thing Don Rodrigo despised becomes protection. The very judgment he made, that some lives were less valuable, becomes the crack through which loss enters his own world. And yet, there's no celebration here, no revenge. Juan doesn't smile, he doesn't feel victorious. He feels sober, because true justice doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like alignment, a quiet correction. The world restoring balance without asking anyone's opinion. Juan didn't wish this on Don Rodrigo. He didn't plan it. He didn't manipulate circumstances. He simply cared for what was placed in his hands. And sometimes, that's enough. There's a lesson hiding here that most people miss because they expect justice to be dramatic. But consequences are often boring in their arrival and devastating in their impact. Arrogance ignores small warnings, disdain overlooks details, and systems built on superiority forget that nature, time, and reality don't recognize hierarchy. Think about how often people ridicule what they don't understand. Ideas dismissed too early, people overlooked because they don't fit a certain image, paths abandoned because they seem slow or unimpressive. The cow survives not because she was strong in the obvious way, but because she was built for endurance. And endurance outlasts display. One situation doesn't suddenly become easy. The injustice hasn't magically vanished. But something important shifts internally. The fear loosens its grip. Not because Don Rodrigo has fallen, but because the illusion of his invincibility has cracked. The balance of power feels less absolute now, less permanent. And that realization opens a door, not to revenge, not to pride, but to clarity. Because when consequences arrive without your involvement, they carry a strange authority. They force reflection. They demand humility. And somewhere, even Don Rodrigo begins to sense it, that the world is responding in a language he doesn't control. The question now isn't whether justice exists. It's what happens when the person who once felt untouchable is finally forced to listen. Loss has a way of stripping people down to their essentials. When Don Rodrigo watches his herd weaken, when numbers on paper no longer translate into control, something unfamiliar settles in. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy one that forces reflection. For the first time in a long while, power doesn't answer back. Influence doesn't negotiate. Money doesn't fix it fast enough. And in that quiet, a realization begins to form, slow and uncomfortable. Juan's life, on the other hand, doesn't explode into luxury. That's important. This isn't a fantasy where the humble man suddenly becomes wealthy overnight. What changes is subtler and more enduring. He has stability, milk to sell consistently, food that doesn't feel rationed every single day, and something far more valuable than comfort, confidence rooted in self-respect. He knows now that what he builds with care tends to last longer than what others take by force. People start to look at Juan differently, not because he demands it, but because integrity has a way of announcing itself over time. The same neighbors who once pitied him now seek his advice. The same man who was dismissed as insignificant becomes someone whose decisions matter. Juan doesn't boast. He doesn't rewrite the story to make himself look smarter than he was. He simply lives it forward. Eventually, Don Rodrigo comes to him, not as an owner, not as a threat, just as a man who has run out of certainties. There's no speech prepared, no defense, only a confession that lands heavier than any accusation. He had confused possession with wealth, control with strength. He believed that having more meant being more, and now, standing in front of Juan, that belief collapses. He admits it quietly, that he always thought he was rich. Rich because he could replace things. Rich because he could discard without consequence. But looking at Juan, at what survived pressure, at what grew through patience, he finally understands something the world rarely teaches directly. Wealth that depends on dominance is fragile. Wealth built on values endures. This is the true inversion of the story. The rich man doesn't become poor merely in material terms, he becomes poor in certainty. And the poor man doesn't simply gain resources, he gains authority over his own life. One loses illusion, the other gains clarity. And clarity, once earned, is difficult to steal. There's no celebration scene, no dramatic payoff. Just an honest recognition of reality as it is. Juan doesn't need validation anymore. Don Rodrigo doesn't need punishment to learn. The lesson completes itself naturally, the way all real lessons do. And yet, this ending doesn't feel final. Because when values shift, when identities are redefined, a deeper question remains, not about cows or land or contracts, but about the choices we make when life hands us power, scarcity, or silence. And that question lingers, quietly asking the same thing of anyone listening. If everything you owned disappeared tomorrow, what kind of wealth would still remain? Now that the story has unfolded, the most important part doesn't belong to Juan or to Don Rodrigo anymore. It belongs to you. Because stories like this are never meant to end when the screen fades out. They're meant to follow you back into your own life, quietly asking questions you can't ignore once you've heard them. So here's the uncomfortable one. What are you doing with the things you once wanted to get rid of? Think about it honestly. The responsibility that arrived uninvited, the season that felt unfair, the role no one applauded, the person everyone else overlooked. Somewhere along the way, life handed you something that didn't look like a gift, and you had a choice. You still do. Most people wait for perfect conditions to act with integrity. They wait until effort is rewarded, until kindness is noticed, until doing the right thing makes sense on paper. Juan didn't have that luxury. He acted first, understood later, and that order matters more than we like to admit. Because character is rarely built when life is easy. It's revealed when excuses are available and still rejected. Ask yourself, where in your life have you been calculating outcomes instead of choosing values? Where have you been tempted to walk away simply because staying costs more? And what version of yourself are you slowly becoming through those choices? This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. Growth doesn't start when circumstances change. It starts when perception does. When you stop asking, is this worth it? And start asking, what is this shaping in me? Everything shifts. Work becomes training. Waiting becomes discipline. Caring becomes investment, not always in money, but in who you are becoming when no one is keeping score. And here's the hard truth most people never hear. You don't control when recognition comes, but you do control whether your values survive until it does. Many people reach success only to realize they lost themselves somewhere along the way. Juan didn't win because he was lucky. He won because he refused to abandon his humanity when it was inconvenient. So don't rush past this moment. Let it settle. Take one small action today that aligns with the person you want to be, not the person fear is shaping. Care where it would be easier to ignore. Stay where quitting would be justified. Choose dignity, even if it costs comfort. These decisions may feel invisible now, but invisibility has never meant insignificance. And I want to hear from you. What part of this story felt uncomfortably familiar? What burden in your life might be hiding potential you haven't seen yet? Write it in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. Naming it is the first step to understanding it. If this message challenged you, helped you see your life with more clarity, or gave you words for something you've been feeling but couldn't explain, subscribe to the channel. Activate notifications so you don't miss the next story, like this video. It truly helps more than you think. And share it with someone who might be questioning their worth in silence right now. Because sometimes all it takes to change a life is realizing that what the world called disposable was never disposable at all.